Wealth is not lost in the decisions you remember. It is lost in the ones you never examine. Most people believe financial stability is a matter of income, that earning more will eventually correct what spending has quietly destroyed. It will not. The leak is not in the amount. The leak is in the moment before the movement. Solomon understood this. Hidden inside the Book of Proverbs is a behavioral structure so small it has been overlooked for centuries. A three-second mechanism that separates those who circulate money from those who quietly command it across time. If this challenges you, stay until the end. Wealth is lost faster in reaction than it is built in effort. Read that again, not because it sounds profound, but because it is precise. Most people spend years trying to earn their way into stability. They work longer hours. They look for better positions. They chase income as though the number itself is the solution. And yet, at the end of each month, the cycle is the same. Money arrives. Money disappears. Effort increases. Control does not. What if the problem was never the income? What if the true point of failure, the actual location where wealth quietly exits, is not in the earning, not in the spending, not even in the planning, ... But in a moment so small, most people have never once examined it. A single moment, less than 3 seconds long, happening dozens of times each day. Decided in silence before any action is taken. This is not about budgets. This is not about investment strategies. What is being revealed here is older than any financial system currently in use. It is a behavioral structure, an ancient mechanism. And once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. Consider the modern financial life. Not in crisis, just ordinary. A person wakes to notifications, emails about payments, reminders about bills, offers, promotions, opportunities, before the day has fully begun. The mind has already been asked to respond to dozens of financial signals, each one small, each one seemingly harmless. Throughout the day, decisions are made, some deliberate, most not. A purchase here, a transfer there, a yes given before the question was fully processed, a no withheld because urgency was presented. By evening, the day is complete. The income is fractured across a dozen small decisions, none of which were deeply considered. And here is the pattern that most do not recognize. This is not a failure of income. It is a failure of structure. The salaried worker earning a consistent income each month does not struggle because the income is insufficient. Often it is not. The struggle exists because the behavioral structure around that income is reactive. Every signal is answered. Every impulse is given room to move. Every moment of urgency is treated as instruction. The cycle is not earn, save, build. The cycle is earn, react, spend, regret, repeat. And the most dangerous part of this cycle is how invisible it is while it is happening. It does not feel like loss. Each individual decision feels justified, reasonable, even necessary. It is only in the accumulated view, weeks, months, years later, that the pattern reveals its cost. More effort does not fix this. A second income does not fix this. A new opportunity does not fix this. Because none of those things address the actual mechanism of the problem. The issue is not money flow. The issue is behavioral structure. The Book of Proverbs understood this. Not as a financial text, as a document of human nature specifically, the nature of those who preserve and those who lose. It was not written for the desperate. It was written for those with enough discernment to receive instruction before making error. Proverbs 21, verse 5. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. This verse is frequently cited as encouragement toward hard work. But that reading misses what is actually being said. The division here is not between the hardworking and the lazy. It is between the diligent and the hasty. Between those who move with structure and those who move with urgency. The ancient Hebrew understanding of diligence was not merely effort, it was considered deliberate movement. Action taken after reflection. The diligent person in this context does not simply work harder, they interrupt impulse before it becomes action. Ancient households that operated with sustained wealth across generations did not run on speed. They ran on restraint. Every resource was guarded before it was distributed. Every decision was weighed before it was executed. This was not hesitation, this was governance. The contrast presented in this proverb is not between success and failure. It is between those who control the moment before action and those who surrender it. Ancient instruction was never focused on external gain. It was focused on internal discipline. The assumption embedded in Proverbs is that if the inner structure is correct, the outer result will follow without force. Control before action. Structure before movement. Pause before decision. This understanding did not develop in modern financial culture. It was nearly eliminated by it. Modern culture has built an entire belief system around speed. Fast decisions are praised as confidence. Immediate responses are treated as intelligence. The person who hesitates is viewed as uncertain, weak, or behind. The market rewards quick movers. Technology enables instant action. The culture reinforces that delay is disadvantage. And this belief feels correct because, in certain narrow contexts, it appears to produce results. A quick sale, a timely investment, a fast response that secured an opportunity. But observe the pattern over time, not in days, in years. The person who moves fast in financial decisions rarely builds slowly. They build in bursts and lose in patterns. The urgency that secured one opportunity is the same urgency that made a costly mistake 2 weeks later. The speed that felt like confidence was, in most cases, simply unexamined movement. What looks like progress is often financial leakage, moving too fast to identify itself. Impulse is not instruction. This is a principle that the ancient systems understood and modern culture has almost entirely forgotten. A fast decision is not a strategic decision. It is a decision that was not given enough time to be examined. The brain processes emotionally before it processes rationally. By the time a decision feels obvious, it has already been filtered through desire, fear, social pressure, or urgency. None of those filters belong in financial architecture. Delay is not hesitation. Delay is filtration. The smallest financial decisions, the ones made without pause, accumulate into the largest financial outcomes. Not the once-a-year major decisions, the daily micro-decisions, the instant responses, the unconsidered agreements. These are where control is either maintained or surrendered. What feels like progress may actually be lost moving too quickly to notice. There is a mechanism that interrupts this pattern. It is not complicated. In fact, its simplicity is the reason it has been overlooked by nearly everyone who has encountered it. People expect the solution to significant financial problems to be equally significant. They expect a complex strategy, a layered system, something that requires expertise or access. What is required is 3 seconds. This is called the 3-second covenant rule. Before any financial movement, spending, agreeing, transferring, committing, a mandatory pause of 3 seconds is imposed, not as hesitation, not as doubt, as deliberate filtration. 3 seconds is not long. But it is enough to interrupt automatic behavior. It is enough to allow the rational mind to arrive at a decision that the emotional mind had already made on its own. The word covenant is used intentionally. A covenant is not a preference. It is not a guideline. It is a binding agreement with oneself, one that holds regardless of circumstance, urgency, or emotion. The covenant is the commitment that the pause will always occur, without exception, before financial action. What makes this rule structurally powerful is not the 3 seconds themselves, it is the repetition. Any single pause produces minimal impact. But a pause applied consistently across every decision, every day, over months and years. That pause becomes identity. The behavior becomes automatic. The hesitation that once had to be consciously enforced becomes the natural first response. A small rule, when repeated without exception, becomes the structure of who you are. There are 2 types of people in any financial environment. The first moves immediately. An offer arrives, and they respond before examining it. A desire appears and they act before questioning it. A pressure presents itself and they yield before considering whether they should. Their money moves constantly because they are constantly responding. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is a failure of structure. The second pauses deliberately. Not because they are uncertain, because they understand that the moment before action is the only moment in which full control exists. Once a decision is made, outcomes are no longer in their hands. The only governable moment is the one before the movement. Over a single decision, this difference is invisible. The reactive person and the deliberate person may arrive at the same outcome in a given scenario, but across years, the difference compounds. The reactive person loses control in small amounts, consistently. A small leak sustained over a decade removes more than any single major loss. The deliberate person maintains control in small amounts, consistently. Preservation compounds. Clarity accumulates. Structure deepens over time. What separates these 2 people is not intelligence, not income, not opportunity. It is a behavioral pattern so small it operates below the level of conscious attention until someone names it. Behavior, not income, defines financial trajectory. And here is what the reactive person rarely acknowledges. They have been reacting for so long that reaction feels like decision-making. The impulse feels like reasoning. The speed feels like confidence. The cycle feels like forward movement. It is not. It is the same loop, wearing a different week. The 3-second covenant rule does not just change behavior, it reveals behavior. The pause forces confrontation with what was about to happen automatically. And in that confrontation, something begins to shift. But the pause is only the first layer. There are 2 more. And the second one is where most people, even the disciplined ones, still quietly lose control without knowing it. The pause is only the beginning. Most people, when they first encounter the idea of a deliberate delay before financial decisions, assume the goal is simply to stop bad spending, to prevent the impulsive purchase, to slow down the unnecessary agreement. And while that is part of it, it is the smallest part. The 3-second covenant rule is not a break. It is a 3-stage internal structure. Each second carries a distinct function. Remove one, and the mechanism loses its architecture. What remains is not discipline, it is merely discomfort without direction. The first second, which was introduced earlier, is awareness, the recognition that a financial moment has arrived, the interruption of automatic behavior before it completes itself. Awareness alone is more powerful than most people realize. Simply knowing that a decision is occurring, rather than letting it occur unconsciously, already repositions the mind from passenger to operator. But awareness without direction produces paralysis. A person who recognizes an impulse and then simply stands in front of it, uncertain what to do, has not gained control. They have only created a longer pause before the same outcome. This is where the second second becomes the true filter. The second second is evaluation, one internal question, precise and unchanging, regardless of context. Does this serve structure or emotion? Not, is this a good idea? Not, can I afford this? Not, will I regret this later? Those questions invite negotiation. They invite the emotional mind back into a conversation it should not be leading. The question is structural. It is binary. It asks only whether the decision about to be made is aligned with the architecture of long-term intention or whether it is a response to a temporary internal state. Emotion presents itself as reason. This is the consistent nature of impulse. The desire to spend feels like recognition of value. The urgency to agree feels like intelligence about timing. The pressure to lend feels like generosity. Each impulse arrives with a justification already attached. Evaluation does not argue with the justification. It simply asks whether the underlying driver is structure or feeling. A spending decision made from structure sounds like, this serves a defined purpose within a pre-established allocation. A spending decision made from emotion sounds like, I want this now and I have the means to acquire it. The second answer is not always wrong, but it is never filtered. An unfiltered financial movement, repeated consistently, is how quiet leakage becomes a permanent condition. Consider lending. A family member presents an urgent need. The emotional driver is immediate. Compassion, loyalty, avoidance of conflict. These are not corrupt motivations. They are human. But a decision made purely from those motivations, without evaluation of structural consequence, rarely produces the outcome either party intended. The disciplined person does not become cold. They become clear. Valuation does not eliminate generosity. It governs the conditions under which generosity is extended. This is a distinction that changes everything. Wealth responds to structure. Not to good intentions, not to hard effort, not to desire, to structure. And structure requires that every decision pass through evaluation before it becomes action. The second filters what the first second identifies. Together, they prevent the majority of unconscious financial loss. But there is a third layer, and this is the one that separates those who simply protect wealth from those who quietly build it. The third second is redirection. This is the hidden lever, the part of the mechanism that is almost never discussed because it requires understanding that the pause is not merely defensive, it is generative. When the 3-second covenant rule interrupts a financial impulse, something does not simply stop, something is released. An amount of attention, intention, or resource that was about to move in one direction is now free to move in another. The question the 3rd-second answers is not, should I stop this? The first 2 seconds already address that. The question the 3rd-second answers is, where does this now go instead? This is redirection. Deliberate, intentional reassignment of what was about to be lost. The person who pauses before an unnecessary purchase and simply walks away has exercised restraint. That is the beginning. But the person who pauses, evaluates, declines, and then immediately redirects that resource toward a defined structural purpose has done something entirely different. They have not just avoided loss, they have converted a moment of impulse into a moment of accumulation. Multiply that conversion across dozens of decisions each week, across months, across years. The compounding effect is not dramatic. It does not produce sudden wealth. It produces something quieter and more durable, a steady, consistent movement of resources toward intention rather than reaction. This is how wealth is quietly built, not through single large decisions made correctly, through thousands of small decisions redirected deliberately. The ancient merchant did not become stable through one successful transaction. He became stable through the consistent governance of every transaction, including, and especially, the small ones. The ones that felt too minor to examine. Those are precisely the ones the 3-second covenant rule was built to govern. Control is not in earning, it is in redirecting. And redirection, practiced daily, becomes the architecture of a different financial life. There are moments when this rule is hardest to maintain, not in ordinary moments, in charged ones. When urgency is presented as opportunity, when social pressure arrives where in the language of loyalty, when emotional reward is immediate and the structural consequence is distant. These are the moments the reactive person nearly always surrenders. And these are the moments the rule was specifically designed for. The pressure to decide immediately is almost never legitimate. Genuine opportunity does not require the elimination of 3 seconds of reflection. If a decision cannot survive a 3-second pause, it was not a decision, it was a manipulation. This is not cynicism. It is structural discernment. The test of discipline is not in its application during calm moments. Anyone can be deliberate when nothing is pressing. The test is consistency, when the environment is designed to produce reaction, when the offer expires, when the room is watching, when the emotion is loudest. Discipline is not intensity. Discipline is consistency, regardless of intensity. The person who applies the rule only when it is convenient has not built a structure. They have built a preference. And preferences yield under pressure. The first reaction is rarely correct. Not because instinct is corrupt, but because the first reaction is generated by the emotional system, which processes for survival and reward, not for long-term structural alignment. The pause creates space for a second response, a slower, more considered one. And that response, over time, becomes the natural first response. This is the rewiring. It does not happen quickly. But it happens. Something shifts when the pause becomes habitual. The identity begins to change before the outcomes do. This is important to understand. The external results, the accumulation, the stability, the structural clarity, these arrive later. What arrives first is a change in how decisions feel. The impulsive pull that once felt irresistible begins to feel foreign. The urgency that once commanded action begins to feel like noise. The emotional justifications that once passed as reasoning begin to reveal themselves for what they are before they complete the sentence. The person who has practiced the 3-second covenant rule long enough does not feel like they are restraining themselves. They feel like the restraint is simply who they are. The pause is no longer an interruption of their natural behavior. It is their natural behavior. This is the psychological rewire. The spender does not become disciplined through effort alone. They become disciplined through repetition until the identity itself shifts. Until the internal self-image is no longer someone trying to control their money, but someone for whom financial discipline is simply how they operate. That identity shift is worth more than any single financial strategy. Because strategies can be abandoned. Identity is far more difficult to undo. The person changes before the outcome changes. Always. Without exception, those who carry this structure quietly do not announce it. You will not identify them by what they display. You will identify them by what they do not. They do not respond to urgency with visible excitement. They do not make financial decisions in public conversations. They do not allow social pressure to accelerate their timeline. They are not cold, they are simply governed by something internal that most people have never encountered. Silence is not passivity. In financial life, silence is protection. The deliberate person does not explain their pause. They do not justify their evaluation. They do not announce their redirection. They simply move, slowly, cleanly, without friction, toward accumulation that no one else is tracking. What is not shown is often what is preserved. The most structured financial lives are frequently the least visible ones. Not because they are hidden deliberately, but because they do not require external validation at each step. The more effort a person needs to display, the more likely that effort is compensating for a structural deficit underneath. The daily practice is simple. Every financial interaction before any response is given, before any action is taken, before any agreement is made, receives 3 seconds. 1. Awareness. Recognize that a decision is occurring. 2. Evaluation. Ask whether this serves structure or emotion. 3. Redirection. Decide not just whether to proceed, but where the resource moves instead. Is this the ritual? It is not dramatic. It does not require a separate time of day, a journal, or an external system. It requires only that the internal commitment holds that the covenant made with oneself is treated as binding, regardless of what the environment is presenting. Consistency over perfection. Not every application will be ideal. There will be moments of failure, of impulse that moves faster than the rule. The response to failure is not self-condemnation. It is return. Simply return to the rule at the next decision. The identity is built in the return, not in the flawless execution. What is practiced daily becomes permanent, not through discipline enforced from outside, through identity formed from within. Proverbs does not promise abundance to the ambitious. It promises it to the diligent. The distinction matters. Ambition is directed outward, toward acquisition, opportunity, growth. Diligence is directed inward, toward structure, consistency, governance of the self. The ambitious person asks, what more can I obtain? The diligent person asks, what am I doing with what I already have? Most financial instruction speaks to ambition. It offers more paths toward acquisition, more methods for increasing income, more systems for capturing opportunity. And while none of that is without value, it addresses only the inflow side of a problem that lives entirely on the behavior side. The ancient warning is clear. Hastiness, not poverty, not misfortune, not lack of opportunity. Hastiness leads to the quiet erosion of what has been built. The person who moves without pause is not undone by a single catastrophic decision. They are undone by 10,000 small unexamined ones. The 3 seconds you did not take this morning. The agreement given without evaluation. The redirection that never happened because the first impulse moved too fast. These are not dramatic losses, they are quiet ones. And quiet losses, sustained across a lifetime, are the ones that are never fully attributed because they never announced themselves as they were occurring. The dividing line between those who circulate money and those who quietly command it is not drawn at the bank. It is not drawn at the workplace. It is not drawn in any visible arena. It is drawn in the silence before the decision. In that silence, identity is chosen. In that silence, direction is established before movement begins. In that silence, what is practiced becomes permanent, and what is permanent becomes who you are. 3 seconds. Applied consistently, without exception, across every financial moment that arrives. That is the covenant. That is the ancient structure. That is what separates the diligent from the hasty, not in the dramatic moments, but in the invisible ones. In stillness, direction is chosen before action is ever taken. The 3-second covenant rule. Awareness, evaluation, redirection, applied before every financial decision, every day, without exception.